1 o'clock, Saturday afternoon, Earth Day. Many things you could be doing. We're so grateful that you've chosen to spend the next hour or so with us. My name's Hammad Nasar, and I, alongside Rosie Addenbrook and Alice Swatton, have curated Divided Selves, the exhibition upstairs. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, there will be a test. No, there won't, but we would encourage you to go up and take a look after our talk. And one of the things that exhibition allowed us to do was to bring Fiona Banner's amazing work, Pranayama Organ, to Coventry. And not just to Coventry, we're proud to say that this is the first time the work has been shown in the UK. Now, for those of you who don't know Fiona, Fiona is, I think, one of the most thoughtful artists working in Britain today. And that's not a new judgment. It's been around for decades. She was nominated for the Turner Prize as far back as 2002. And rather than read you all the list of institutions that have honored her work and shown her, what we decided to do instead was to do a conversation in 3 parts. So roughly around 20 minutes each. So in that first 20 minutes, I'll sort of give an introduction to Fiona, not through institutions and adjectives, but through a selection of her works. Quoting Fiona back to you, is art is an experiment that should be carried out in public. And I think the exhibition is where the art meets its public, and given that spirit, that's what we wanted to project in the first third. In the second third, we wanted to actually talk a little bit and explicate the wonderful film installation, Pranayama Organ, that for those of you who haven't seen it, would encourage you to go upstairs and take a look. And then we'll have at least 15, 20 minutes or so for opening up the conversation. And don't worry, there's no pressure. If you don't have a question, there'll be plenty, I'm sure, for us to natter on about, but would encourage you to ask those questions when they come. So with that, what we've done, and the process we followed, was we had the briefest of conversations, because the last thing we wanted to do was to have the conversation before we do the conversation. So what we did was what Fiona sort of shared with me her, I think it's called Master PowerPoint, which had about 100-odd slides, and as counter offer, I sent back about 20-odd slides, and we've settled at around 40. We will zip through them, so the idea is not this, again, there will be no test, but what we wanted to do was really just to share with you a cluster of works, experiments around a series of ideas. And then some of those ideas we'll take with us as we start talking about Pranayama Organ. With that, we'll start. And the work I'm showing here is called The Artist as a Publication. It dates back to 2009. You can see the ISBN number, tastefully letter set, somewhere above the nude body again. So you're thinking about the ideas that we're that are in play here, about the idea of the publication as an exercise in finding a public, as the distribution of ideas, but also thinking about publication itself and publishing as a kind of a performance. And that also gets us into those ideas of the economy, of how does art circulate, how do books circulate, and what can artists do in terms of arbitrating between these 2 different modes of circulation. So this is the actual work, but I think the work continues with this wonderful letter from the British Library asking Fiona to say, well, there's this ISBN, but you haven't deposited anything in the British Library. And then there's this lovely response back in which there's something slightly absurd, but very polite. So there's this polite absurdity in what comes across almost as like workshopping. How does an artist deposit herself in the British Library? And this ends with actually that deposit slip. Again, this is a form that's used for books, but this is about the artist herself describing herself as a book. So it's about an exchange with institution. It's about, also these ideas of the nude. I mean, I remember one of the first public exhibitions for which a big catalog was done for me was back in 2005 at the Aldrich. And the publishing director there, because when we were talking about how many should we print, it was like, no, not more than 2,000. Nothing except the nude sells more than 2,000. So when I asked, well, how do the nude sell? He said, well, we printed 2,000. We're now on our third reprint. So I think there's something also around what distributes and in what quantity that's wrapped into this work. Just continuing on that theme, so this is a helicopter blade, but you can see that this also is carrying an ISBN number. This is just a gratuitously cute photograph of the blade with the dog. You're getting the picture. And this then is an Airfix model. You remember Airfix, folks? And this was the model of the Harrier that Fiona built, and this was in her studio, leading up to this magnificent work in the Devine Gallery of Tate Britain in 2011. I think the work itself was 2010, but the display was 2011. And there is both a beauty but a certain awkwardness here. It recalls, I think, Patricia Bickers, who talked about it as a Vitruvian man. And again, that link to Leonardo da Vinci is interesting because for his interest in flight. But there's something about planes as a kind of sculpture, but also as nature. The fact that this is a Harrier, it is, the fact that so many planes are named after birds or natural events. I think the typhoon that we will see later on is very much in play here, and again links us back to this, that the fact that this is happening on Earth Day makes it very, very appropriate. And again, so here you see people looking up at the play. There's something sort of very phallic going on here, and I think this is also one of the things that I really enjoy about Fiona's art is that it hits you in at least a couple of body parts, everything. So there's something to do with the language and conceptual art that hits your head. There's something at a level of feeling that hits your heart, and there's something primal that can get to your gut or zones even lower than that. We move on to the next Airfix, and this is a Jaguar. It's a different display, and you can see the kind of the sheen. So there's almost like a mirrored surface. So for anybody who would go across this, they would see themselves reflected. And this is also super interesting because it raises that issue about our own complicity in the politics that we live in, So those ideas of war and how that actually plays out in democracies. We all remember, the Falklands. We all remember Boris Johnson rushing over as frequently as he possibly could to the Ukraine. So I think there's a wider narrative at play here, and this work sort of, for me, sort of reminds, it's like a reminder that we have to think about our own political agency in these exchanges. And then, there you go. Those massive sculptures are transformed into ingots. Continuing that sort of exploration of geometric sculptures, These are a body of works known as the full stop sculptures. Now, the full stops, or as the Americans would call it, period, and that in that wordplay, again, there's that idea of both language, but also the body and bodily function in play here. So the full stop is about a gap in language, or perhaps where language stops and where the imagination takes over, or where you're invited in to imagine what could be a response. Fiona, in talking about them, has called them, they animate you, you animate them. And this little YouTube video, so don't worry, it is that fuzzy, even if you go, it's not just a projection, quite literally shows people animating them. And the first time I saw this, it was like, okay, can he nail this? I really want him to nail this. Yes.
All right.
Which he does. And then they take different forms. They take flight. Here you see, I think this is the Delaware Pavilion, isn't it? So these are actually dirigibles. They become paintings. So these are found paintings that Fiona has sort of obscured whatever battleship that was on these oceans. They become full stops. And these particular full stops, wonderfully and evocatively titled as Peanuts, Clang, and Orator, were produced in 2020 as part of an action by Greenpeace. So you see the Greenpeace activists here depositing, I think this was Clang, outside the DEFRA office. Here we see peanuts being hoisted onto a ship and deposited on Dogger Bank.
So sculptures that are a void comma, a space comma, a breath period, a pause period, the call for a stop comma that are agents of change. Some sculptures that are wet.
This is Orator, also finding its way. And what you heard briefly was Fiona reading, which is called a squid poem. And that's been sort of reproduced in the publication that you're all very welcome to take away. And I wanted to just sort of point out where it ends. And it ends with that idea of hope. And thinking about activism, Greenpeace, Earth Day, the fact that these sculptures, because they go into the bottom of the sea, can act as a deterrent for trawler fishing. Bringing that back into ideas of the landscape, about the environment, about nature. The same sculptures as a painting. And now, this is where I encountered Fiona's pranayama organ. This is Venice. It's a children's basketball court set within a converted church. Again, you see that sort of play with language, idea of competition and of poetry. Runway, the sort of photographs that, as you could probably just make out on the left here, that they're cut from a magazine. The magazine was a Korean edition of Vogue, and we'll talk about this a little later on. But you see this work as you enter and as you leave the exhibition. So it's not in the same space as the film itself. And then we move to pranayama organ. And given that maybe perhaps some of you have not seen the film upstairs, we prepared a little clip. It's about 5 minutes of extracts, which we will play, and then we'll start our conversation. Let's start by saying thank you, Fiona.
Oh, thank you for an
Not just-
amazing introduction.
Not just for being
Great.
here, but for that work. Because every time I see it, and we were having a conversation as to how long the clip should be, because people who've seen it before, you know, will we be testing their patience? And my sort of response was to say, look, I've seen this so many times, and I can see this on loop, you know, perpetually. And I'm sure some of you will, if not all of you who've seen it, will agree. And I wanted to start by actually trying to understand how you made it. Because even just those little extracts show you there's so many characters here. You know? There is the planes themselves, which we've been introduced to with you know, in the past with your earlier work. There's the music, which is very much a full-fledged character. The landscape itself, with those knowing shots of the cliffs, the beach, that encounter between the land and the sea and the sky. I noticed this time around the birds much more than I have previously, and I wonder it's because I was thinking about that connection. There's language as song, there is humming, there is breath, the name itself, pranayama. So how did all of this come together? How did you decide that this is the orchestration that you wanted to do in this piece?
Well, first of all, I'm really interested in the question because it's important to recognise that when you're making work, when I'm making work, I'm not making it with all the answers. And we're sitting here with the privilege of hindsight, and I've come to understand quite a lot about this film in the year and a half since I've made it, partly because I've shown it quite a lot, and that's you can kind of gauge and learn about the kind of frequency of the work when you show it. But I guess to begin with the title, pranayama, organ, pranayama, yes, as in breath, organ as in the body, as in the lungs, as in the breath, as in the phallus, as in the cock, as in the bird, as in the falcon, as in flight, as in air, as in typhoon, as in destructive force, increasingly present in nature in these turbulent times, this turbulent relationship that we have with nature at the moment. So it all sort of came together, I think, through a feeling around these elements, and the two main protagonists within the film, as you've referenced, there are many characters in the film, but the two main protagonists are a falcon, a fighting falcon, and a typhoon, Eurofighter Typhoon. So they're both aircraft that are currently in service, which is an important element because we're sort of somehow involved in these aircraft. There's an element of culpability, and they're not. We can't view them with the sort of patina of nostalgia that might be associated with historic aircraft, for instance. And they are both sort of placebos in that they are military decoy aircraft. So I actually bought them from China, in fact, the factory that supplies the military.
So is this an eBay purchase or?
Alibaba.
Alibaba.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Alibaba.
Yeah.
So those particular type of aircraft were important to me, partly because of the names. So, you know, the strange irony, I guess, that these aircraft are named after nature, and yet obviously they speak of anti-nature in so many ways, or are anti-nature in so many ways. And then there are other characters in the film, in that I'm one of the actors, a fellow artist who works with me at the studio, Kirsty Harris, is also features in the film, and we made these small costume size versions of the aircraft to sort of, I guess, help us in performing some strange rituals around encounter and combat. So I think as the experience of making the film, which was, you know, I'd see as largely a sort of performative, sort of quite theatrical experience, really, making the film, I came to realize that we were trying to act out or perform this dream, and that dream was around emasculating the tools of conflict. But as these two characters come together and sort of perform or dream a dream of coalescence, they come face to face with their own demise because they are killer machines.
And this choice of making a film, was this, you know, was this the form right from the start, or did you have earlier iterations where it was a sculpture, a performance?
Yeah. Many. And in fact, this sort of was one of those iterations, in that this may well have been, the material that formed this film may well have been a test shoot, or may well have been a performative moment that was filmed. I didn't really know at the time, but I went down to the coast during deep lockdown with some friends, one of which is here, Alice Waters, who produced the film. And
well, you were 2 meters apart at all times. So.
Well, it was very strange because we had to go at dawn, so that nobody was on the beach. And then that sort of became part of the weird, eerie light of the film. And of course, people did eventually tip up on the beach and were slightly alarmed by what might be going on. And then there was a strange confusion, because one of the characteristics of that particular bit of coast is that quite a lot of migrants have made the crossing and landed on that area. And then, of course, they leave the grey inflatable boats behind. So I've had many visceral experiences of being there when people have landed at the end of, you know, very, very arduous and intense journey on that spot. So there are many things to do with the particular area, because there's this petrified coast, the forest underneath the seabed there, so it sort of speaks of different times, you know, deep time, deep space, changing coastlines, and also I think just a time of precarity that we were all in at that, a time of you know, deep unknowingness and loss of confidence that we were all in at that point in the pandemic, probably informed some elements of the film. And really, I didn't quite know what how it was going to end up, but I knew I wanted it to feel profoundly romantic and also profoundly unresolved in a sense, and that I all along had this talisman of Wild is the Wind, the song. So the soundtrack's a very broken down version of that song, and there's something about the sense of unrequited love, but also unrequited relationship or unrequitable relationship between man and nature within that song that that sort of drew me through the film and gave me a way of I sort of gave me a soundtrack really to work to. But then it wasn't until quite close to the end that I realised, well, I have to make the song anew, and I ended up going to a deserted church with some friends, and we recorded the soundtrack at that point with this sort of rather overblown, slightly grandiose, verbose way of, I suppose, using the coercive history or emotional history and religiosity of the organ, but then going back to the lungs, to the body, to the blood.
Yeah, I mean, and that organ, the pranayama organ, is what you hear and kind of feel almost before you see the film.
Yeah.
It kind of leads you in.
Yeah.
And in some way becomes almost a leading character.
Yeah.
Of the film.
Yeah. But I just suddenly thought I didn't answer your question, which was that I had one of these inflatable aircraft, these full-scale decoy aircraft in my studio, and I realised I wanted to do something with it. I had it for quite a long time, and I realised I wanted it sort of to be breathing, to be moving. I didn't want it to be a sort of static sculptural element, and I was drawn to the absurdity of this sort of almost toy-like and yet actual military element, sort of somehow cutely brutal. So it's quite dangerous, really, and yet sculpturally it wasn't quite working. So I started making little films of it to send to people. I was working with Alice at the time, and we were working remotely. So it sort of naturally started to become a film, because that's how I was communicating about this thing that slowly became a creature to me, and that's what led into this this thing being a film, not anything else. It might have been a sculpture, it might have been a text, it might have been a sound piece, but sort of all came together through this time-based medium of film.
And this particular stretch of the coast, and that you talked about where it was shot. What meaning does that have in the film beyond this, what you've talked about in terms of? I think one of the things you brought up, and this I hadn't picked up, was that idea of passage and migration, and quite often not just war being one trigger for migration, and if anything, quite frankly, you ain't seen nothing yet, because what the climate will do to migration pressures is perhaps a multiple of what we've seen so far in human history as a result of war. Yeah. So that relationship, was that sort of written into the landscape, or are we now reading it, as you're saying, after 1.5 years of you making it?
It is written into the landscape, and that the piece of sea that we're looking out on in the film is the channel, is really important. So the stretch of water between us and mainland Europe, a very emotional piece of water, but also, it's used as a crossing, but it's often as much as a conduit, it's a barrier or a border, and that particular bit of cliff is constantly eroding. It does speak of the need to, I suppose, the fragility of, I want to say the fragility of borders, really, and it's meant quite a lot to me to show this film in the context of this wider exhibition, actually, because one thing that I really I find profound about the exhibition upstairs is how it brings together these elements of yes, climate, yes, conflict, yes, crossings, yes, borders, and it's a very it's very it's held in a very fragile way in the exhibition, I think, and all of those elements are also present in this film. And how you make decisions when you're making a piece of work, I think, is at its best sort of has almost the tenor of a very lucid dream, where you kind of understand it, but it hasn't gone into the space that we are now in, where we are articulating it. Yeah. So it's sort of pre-verbal, and that also was a very is a sort of important element within that film somehow, that it has this sort of non-verbal element to it, although language is all around it.
Yeah. We'll talk to we'll get to language, but one of the things that I think really struck me was this. I suppose it's pathos, or maybe perhaps pathos. There's almost there's a reluctance that one can feel in this duel / dance between the falcon and the typhoon. And I don't know if it's the music, it's the choreography, or something in between. How did you achieve that, or orchestrate that?
I mean, I would say they are reluctant, they are forlorn, and they are stuck in this combative bind. It's not that they want to be there, it's that they don't know another way of being. So I guess I was thinking about, I suppose, how we are stuck somehow in a mode of conflict. There is this eternal need for us to, through a desire to, for ownership, one way or another, even if that's something spiritual or religious or driven by religion. It's we're stuck in this eternal conflict. We are in a bind, and actually at this point, we're all very particularly aware that we're stuck in an eternal bind with nature. We've kind of we don't want to be in conflict with nature, but we are. So I guess throughout all my work, I am kind of exploring my own and our own stupidity or dumbness, and how I'm always trying to break out of that. I mean, as we are trying to break out of it, we just seem sort of drawn back into the sort of our own limitations, So
there is the film, which is called Pranayama Organ. Then there are the beanbags, and if you haven't yet experienced the beanbags, you must, because they're an essential part of the work. Then there are the cutouts from the Korean Vogue, and then there are the sort of the textual takeaways. Could you talk us a little bit about these elements as to your choice to have them and what they do in conversation and dialogue with the film?
Yeah. Well, I'll just take it piece by piece.
Yeah,
I feel you're asking a bigger question, but I'm going to answer it in a relatively mundane way, perhaps. But the bean bags, soft parts, I call the bean bags. They sort of loosely take the form of wings, fins, noses. So I guess they refer back to the body and the fact that we all note, or I am mindful of the fact that we always have a body. It's not like we can go and see some art and suddenly we don't have a body anymore. So how are we seeing this art and or this film? And in the particular case of Pranayama Organ, I wanted the viewers to be somehow performatively engaged or bodily engaged with the body of the aircrafts in the film, and it felt like to be reclining was the right
attitude.
modus, yes. And then with the text, I guess the text is a sort of slight spoof text of a what you might normally identify as a gallery guide. So the the initial text came from a collaboration with that I did with the writer Tom McCarthy, and the initial invitation, which actually came from a gallery in Korea where I was showing this this piece, was to sort of engage in an explanatory conversation around the work. Sort of could be a bit like this, but more anyway, whatever. And we thought, well, all of that's a theatre anyway, and so we ended up making this absurdist play where Tom took on the character of T, Typhoon, and I took on the character of F, Falcon. So it sort of is a kind of meta piece, I suppose, or a side piece to the film. I guess, I mean, even though I am here fumbling through in normal language or conventional means an explanation of the work, it's not, I am aware of the absurdity of that. So often it feels more comfortable to me to make a sort of perhaps a poetic digressionary
or a bridge almost into.
Yeah, or maybe to create humour from it, I guess. And the squid, for squid not quid text that you put up on the slides there, which was a sort of manifesto that I read when the full stop sculptures were being deployed from the Greenpeace ship, the Esperanza. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's sculptures for with a porpoise. Sculptures that are for squid, not quid. Period, etc. But it's a sort of, it's a joke, but it's not a joke, if you know what I mean. So I do find that sort of agency of that some humour or some kind of absurdist theatre brings is quite a helpful decoy, if you like, to having to resort to explanation.
Do you want to talk about the last bit, which was the Korean Vogue and the photo shoot and runway?
Yeah. So that came about because I was showing the film in Seoul, South Korea, and I was invited by Korean Vogue to do a photo shoot in the gallery alongside the show, with the idea that they could get me in some seriously expensive garb, and I could glamorously pose with a fighting falcon. However, that didn't happen. But I did start to think the performative space that this luxury magazine can offer is quite an interesting one. So I did a shoot, in fact, in London with somebody who used to be, Emma Summerton, who was my first ever studio assistant, who's now a top Condé Nast photographer. And we made this sort of, I guess, parody of a runway, so drawing on the idea of the fashion catwalk and the runway of aircraft. And sort of, I think in the case of some of those photographs, they do feel very very sad and very kind of end of the affair, the end of luxury, and that the garments are these sort of often deflated aircraft that look like big dying fish, etc. So it sort of was really, there was a lot of pathos to that. But yeah, it was again a really good site. The magazine was a really good site for that work, actually.
Yeah. I mean, that's perhaps the sort of the larger question that you referred to that I was getting at is this interest, and we've seen it in the earlier works as well, is, you know, you're interested in dealing directly with institutions, with the British Library, with the Devine, with the Air Force, or the idea of the military as a presence, with DEFRA, with Greenpeace. There is this, I think there's this impulse for you to want to play with them. The interest in ideas of circulation, and thinking literally about how your work circulates, and how people may be able to access it as the publication, as the photograph, as you know, I can easily see a soundtrack for this as well, kind of, you know, being dropped on SoundCloud, you know, somewhere, and that whole, you know, the polite absurdity of it all. You know, there's it's all doing this without. It's not a very shouty kind of, you know, practice. And one of the things because I'd seen the work in Venice, and I thought, you know, it was one of my favorite things in Venice. And we're already working on this exhibition. For those of you who haven't seen it, it takes up the 4 galleries. Sort of, you can welcome you to go up and take a look. And it's called Divided Selves, and you enter the exhibition in a gallery which looks at nations as a sort of division of geography, you know, that usually happen in history through an act of violence. So that's how you enter the show. That recognition that we all live in parts of the world that have been divided through violence. And you leave the exhibition through a gallery which looks at the nation not through geography, but through the sort of this idea, Ben Anderson's idea of an imagined community. That, you know, we are a nation because of the songs we sing and the food we eat, and, you know, the history we read. So Tudors twice, nothing on the empire in schools. That's what shapes us. And of course, those things are kind of falling apart now. That culture of the nation, thanks to technology, thanks to sort of certain forms of capitalism that we're living through. And then there Fiona's and Jana Louise Wilson's work that sort of connects these two ideas of nation. These two ideas that are both kind of competing with each other, so there's an element of competition there, but there's also some element of play as to how do they both exist. So perhaps the one last sort of question, and you started talking about it a little bit, and then we'll open it up, is up till now, I think this was the first time this work was shown in a group exhibition context, because up till now it has been shown kind of on its own, with its various parts that allow people into and out of it. And, you know, it's only been on for a couple of months now. But I wonder if you've had a chance to think about what does showing within a group context do to the work or for the work, that, you know, what parts does it reach or not reach compared to showing it on its own?
Actually, to begin with, I wasn't sure how the work would sit within this exhibition. And now I really understand how it does sit within this exhibition. First of all, I'd say I don't think work is ever read in isolation. So even though you saw it as part of a solo presentation in Venice, it's always suspended in context, and it's always suspended in reference. And when we're making work, it's suspended in the past, the present, and the future. And I guess within this exhibition, it's you've created a particular context where the question of nationhood, the question of, I think, sort of empathy around nationhood, as opposed to sort of the assumed brutality that's required, or violence that's required to exist within a nation in many ways. So the sort of community dimension. There are lots of things that have come up in this exhibition that I hadn't thought about literally, that are present in the work, that I think it does connect to. So it's brought out broader things. And I also think just this sort of, it's important to reference that work is constantly changing. So I don't believe art is static. It's always seen through the context of the present as well, and it's sort of so it's in motion, and therefore context is crucial. You know, for instance, I really I love that halfway through this show, much as I'm grateful to be in it, my work's going to shift, and Hayden Patel's going to take...
Who's in the audience here then? Hello, Hayden.
Take that Ramon with very wonderful work, and that'll shift again. And I just think that we must accept our flux, and we must accept that we don't always really know and understand how work is affecting us, and be open to the sort of, I suppose, the vulnerability of art, as well as the vulnerability of ourselves.
Well, that's actually a great point, because I'm just thinking about it. You were describing when the work was being made, which is in the context of, well, both lockdown but also sort of post-Brexit. When the work was shown in Venice, that was quite soon after the Ukraine sort of ongoing conflict, and that created a very charged context for the work. So I think that's actually a really great point. And perhaps at this point we'll just sort of open up to the floor for any questions. You don't have to talk about this work, but also anything previously that we shared.
Hello. What is your ultimate goal? Sorry. Hello. What is your ultimate goal as an artist? Sorry.
No, that's a
small question to kick this off. To keep making art, to keep, I guess, not quite knowing, and to keep questioning through my work. So I suppose there's a sort of restlessness to my practice, and I find that I find it really challenging often, but I think ultimately to carry on doing that for the rest of my life.
Question back here.
Hi. I've only caught the last sort of 10-15 minutes of the talk, and I've not had a look at the exhibition. I prefer to sort of, normally read up, but this is a real privilege to actually have the artists speak about their art and ideas and concept, etc. So what I've taken from the last 10 minutes is that the lady, sorry, I've forgotten your name. I think I'm getting a feeling that your work is timeless, and it is transitional, and it evolves, and it's a part of you. So there's a very deep connection there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that was a beautiful and poetic response, and I wish you'd been here for the rest of the 45 minutes.
Yes, I've got a. I was hoping to get here earlier, but I have a poppy that comes first, so yeah. So I'm going to have to get back pretty quick.
Bring the puppy next time.
Thank you so much, and I will have a look at the exhibition.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So, do we have any more questions? Yes.
Hi. Yeah.
Use the mic. Could you actually turn it up?
It's for. Well, I can repeat the question if that helps, because the mic's there also because this is being recorded and it's being live streamed on YouTube so that people can hear the questions.
Yeah. So congratulations on the exhibition and on the film.
Thanks, Atal.
And I was really taken by the Harrier jet in the Tate at the beginning, and now the inflatable jets. The inflatable jets being full of air, and the Harrier and the Jaguar finishing as ingots. And I seem to remember once I asked you coming out of yoga, have you got a Harrier jet in your backpack? And actually you sort of just smiled and ran off, and now I knew what you were up to. But so full of air, it's almost the timeless question, perhaps, is one thing. I didn't know, so the question itself is really a banal one. Did the Harrier jet and the Jaguar sculptures, did you melt them down to those ingots?
Yeah, so after the duration of the exhibition, there was a question of what to do with the aircraft. And I felt quite strongly, really, that they were public objects, that they shouldn't go into a private collection. There were very few places, really, that I think could have held them well. And they also sort of became these fetish objects because of how they were displayed, one polished to a mirror, and the other sort of, I like this court sort of nature trophy. It just felt very potent as well. I'd done a lot of research into the life of those aircraft and connected with quite a lot of the pilots, etc., in collating a sort of CV, if you like, of those aircrafts, a biography of each of those aircrafts. And I didn't really want to live with them, and I owned them, actually. I was quite clear with the Tate that when once I found the particular planes that I wanted to work with, that I bought them personally. I mean, even though they funded the exhibition, it was important to me that I held that transaction. I was responsible for that transaction, but it's a kind of heavy thing to own in life, and and also I suppose because I am an iconoclast in many ways around the image, I didn't really want to live with the image of them either, or I didn't want the image of them to live on. So I thought, well, two things. I'd like to erase that image. But secondly, I'd kind of like to store the idea. And then I thought, how do you store metal? Well, going back centuries, you store metal as ingots. So I took the planes apart, and in fact, I had to take them apart and almost reconstruct them in the space like Airfix. You would an Airfix model anyway, because that space at Tate doesn't preempt massive, great contemporary sculpture. It preempts a different scale and a different time of sculpture.
Which is part of the power of the piece when it's
yeah, it was sort of exactly wrong in that sort of weird space, empire, redolent space. So we took them apart and drove them up to Wales, where I melted them down and poured them into ingots and then stamped, so the taxonomy stayed with them, and they're all stamped either Harrier, Harrier Hawk, Harrier Jump Jet, or Jaguar. And now I've got loads of ingots.
Well, maybe we have time for one last question, if there's. Yep, there's one right.
I was just thinking about the idea of borders over the last, because it's sort of the idea of nationality. In order to have a nation, you have to have violence. Starts as the empires break down after the First World War. And over that past 100 years since the First World War, there's borders all over the place which never existed, accompanied by violence. And one of the things you hear in Ukraine is, from the Russian-speaking Ukraine, is I don't know what's happening to us. And you hear the same thing when the wall in Berlin, you know, same thing in India with the Indian partition. And there's something with the dancing with the two objects in flux but not quite coming together. That's a bit sad in some ways, because if you keep going high, then the borders disappear at some stage, I assume. I'm just wondering, increasingly you're going to get more polarisation, but there's something about the flux and that's a bit I don't know, a bit sad about where we are at.
Yeah, I take what you're saying. I guess within the film that aircraft are grounded and also, you know, bound to us. We're not separate from them is a key element of the film. I mean, as you say, we're playing out all around us is this horrendous combative reality performance. You know, we see our leaders posturing and puffing themselves up and you know, engaging in potential peace talks, treaties, whatever. But really, you know, that's not what's going on. We're kind of I think the distance or the gap or the inability to coalesce is, you know, we're seeing that played out on the big stage of global politics. And yeah, there are elements of that in the film as well. It's deeply sad, and where that leaves the next generation when we think about the impact that has on migration and climate and everything is, you know, well, it's sad, to use your word, yeah.
But not to end on that note, although I said, you know,
on the upper.
But I think one of the points here, and that's where I think the tag team that you just referred to. So Fiona and Jane Louise Wilson's film will run until the 4th of June. And then Hiten Patel and Aziz Hazara sort of, you know, step into the ring. And in a way, what they do with their work and bringing in new different perspectives and energies is to think about, you know, there's this element of sort of competition and conflict that is at play, but also very much is, you know, the place of ritual and play itself. And if the drawing of borders is about, well, you know, how do we turn neighbors into strangers? You know, let's look at Belfast, for instance, where there are literally 150 doors that clang shut at night, every night, and don't open at the weekends because they're dividing communities physically from each other. Is play and what forms of play are a possibility for us to remember how to live together again. And I think that's kind of those aspects of hope. So those combating aircraft, they're sharing the same sky, or the light that comes through to political prisoners in the work of, say, Sophia Karim. It's, you know, we share the same light. So how do we turn, and what can artists help us do is to capture that bits of hope and make sure we keep that with us. With that, I think it's really important that we stop so that those of you who haven't seen Fiona's wonderful film and the overall exhibition have the chance to do so. But before we do, just take this opportunity to thank Fiona for coming up, for sharing her wonderful work with us.
Thank you.
And thanks to the terrific team at the Herbert, in particular Kirsty, for organizing all of this to make technology run so flawlessly. Hats off to you, Kirsty, and the whole team here.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Can I also just add, thank you everybody for coming. I'm really touched that you came on a Saturday, and thanks for your time. It's lovely of you. There's also a catalogue on the way out if you'd like one.